Most people think confidence is about preparing for the big moment, finding the right words, or convincing yourself that you have nothing to fear. Then you sit across from someone whose opinion matters, and something subtle happens. You become aware of your voice, your posture, the way you are answering, even the expression on the other person's face. You start editing yourself while the conversation is still happening. Nothing has gone wrong, but your attention has already left the conversation and turned toward managing how you are being perceived. That quiet shift is often where confidence begins to disappear. You may know exactly what you want to say and still soften it. You may have a good idea and introduce it with an apology. You may disagree with someone and immediately question yourself simply because they sound more certain. You cannot decide whether someone approves of you, whether they find you impressive, or whether nervousness disappears when you need it to. You can decide whether those things are allowed to dictate your words, your posture, your attention, and your conduct. That distinction sounds simple, but living by it changes the way you carry yourself. Confidence, then, becomes less about creating a particular feeling and more about developing trust in your own judgment. Nervousness does not have to mean something is wrong. Silence does not need to be rescued. Disagreement does not require retreat. Your heart can race while you remain composed, and your mind can question you while you continue speaking clearly. The more often you experience yourself doing that, the less you need to perform confidence for anyone else. Something quieter begins to take its place. The knowledge that you can remain steady even when the situation around you and the emotions inside you are anything but steady. The first change begins with something so ordinary that most people never notice how much power it has: the way they speak. Listen closely to how uncertainty enters a person's sentences. They apologize before offering an idea, soften every opinion, explain themselves before anyone has questioned them, or fill their words with phrases that quietly tell everyone else not to take them too seriously. The problem is not humility. The problem is allowing insecurity to narrate your thoughts before anyone else even hears them. Stoicism gives you a different standard. Speak according to what you actually know, and when you do not know, simply admit that without turning uncertainty into self-deprecation. There is a difference between saying you are unsure and announcing that your opinion is probably worthless. One is honesty, the other is surrender. The more you remove unnecessary disclaimers, the more your communication begins to reflect self-respect rather than your anxiety about how you will be perceived. And that leads to something deeper, because even when your words become more certain, there is another part of you that can reveal fear before you say anything at all. Think about how quickly a conversation can change when you enter it already worried about being judged. You may have a useful point, but before you speak, you begin editing it in your head. You remove the strongest sentence because it sounds too direct. You add an apology because you do not want to seem difficult. You say that you could be wrong before anyone has even responded. By the time the idea reaches the other person, it has been surrounded by so much hesitation that they may not even hear the idea itself. They hear uncertainty. This does not mean people are cruel or that confidence requires certainty about everything. It means communication carries more than information. It also carries a signal about how much weight you believe your own words deserve. When that signal constantly says, "Please do not take me too seriously," other people often respond to the signal they receive. The useful part is that this pattern can be changed without becoming aggressive. You do not need to speak louder, interrupt people, or turn every conversation into a demonstration of authority. In fact, those reactions often reveal that a person is still dependent on other people's perception. Real control is quieter. Before speaking, know what you actually mean. Remove the unnecessary apology. Remove the extra explanation that exists only to protect you from disagreement. Say the thought plainly, then allow the other person to respond. If you are uncertain, say so with precision. There is a major difference between saying, "I do not have enough information to be certain," and saying, "This is probably a stupid idea, but maybe." The first communicates judgment. The second communicates fear. One leaves room for discussion. The other asks the listener to decide whether your thought deserves attention. That distinction matters because honesty and insecurity can look surprisingly similar from the inside. A person may tell themselves that they are simply being humble when they constantly reduce their own authority. They may believe they are avoiding arrogance, being polite, or making space for smarter people. Those intentions can be sincere, but good intentions do not automatically produce good behavior. If your humility repeatedly prevents you from expressing what you know, then it has stopped serving truth and started serving fear. Stoic discipline asks for something more balanced. You do not inflate yourself, and you do not diminish yourself. You simply try to represent reality accurately. If you know something, speak with appropriate confidence. If you do not know, acknowledge the limit. If someone has a better argument, consider it. None of these actions require you to perform weakness. This becomes especially important in situations where your words have consequences. Maybe you are giving advice at work, explaining a decision to your family, negotiating a price, meeting someone new, or speaking in front of a group. In each case, the temptation is to manage the other person's reaction before they have even had one. You start predicting what they might think and adjust yourself accordingly. That is where your attention leaves the subject and becomes trapped inside your own self-image. You are no longer asking, "What is true here and what is useful to say?" You are asking, "How do I make sure they still like me after I say it?" Those are very different questions. The second one makes your behavior unstable because the answer depends on something outside your control. Once you notice this, you can practice a small form of mental discipline. Before you speak, pause long enough to identify the actual point you want to make. Then say that point without decorating it with unnecessary fear. This may feel strange at first because you are removing a habit that has been protecting you from imagined rejection. You might feel exposed. You might even think you sound too confident when, from the other person's perspective, you sound completely normal. That is an important discovery. Anxiety often makes ordinary self-respect feel like arrogance because you have become accustomed to shrinking yourself. The discomfort is not necessarily evidence that you have gone too far. Sometimes it is simply evidence that you have moved away from an old pattern. And that shift matters because clear speech is only the beginning. Once you stop letting insecurity shape your words, you become ready to notice how your body communicates what your voice may never say under pressure. Your body often tells the story your mouth is trying to hide. You can walk into a room knowing exactly what you came to say and still feel your shoulders tighten before you reach your seat. Your hands become restless. Your breathing gets shallow. You start moving faster, speaking faster, looking for somewhere to place your eyes. Your nervous system can begin preparing for danger long before your reasoning has decided that anything dangerous is happening. Most people treat those sensations as instructions. Their heart is racing, so they assume they should retreat. Their hands are shaking, so they assume everyone can see their insecurity. Their stomach tightens, so they conclude they are not ready. The sensation becomes a verdict. That is where confidence starts slipping away. There is a quieter option. You can notice what your body is doing without immediately obeying it. Your pulse can be fast while your movements remain slow. Your chest can feel tight while your shoulders stay relaxed. Your mind can be scanning for rejection while you continue paying attention to the person in front of you. As Epictetus taught, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. You are no longer treating anxiety as an emergency that needs to be fixed before you can function. You are allowing the feeling to exist while choosing your conduct separately. Your internal state matters, but it does not automatically deserve authority over your actions. You may not control the first physical reaction, but you have influence over what happens after you notice it. Consider what happens when someone enters an important meeting already thinking, "I need to look confident." Now they are watching themselves while everyone else is watching the conversation. They are monitoring their posture, their hands, their voice, their facial expression, and the impression they might be making. Instead of being present, they are performing an internal inspection. Every small movement becomes evidence. If they touch their face, they think they look nervous. If they pause, they think they look uncertain. If their voice changes, they assume everyone noticed. The attention that should be directed toward the actual situation gets consumed by self-monitoring. Confidence becomes harder because the person is trying so intensely to observe themselves being confident. A better approach is surprisingly practical. Decide how you want to conduct yourself before the pressure rises. Then give your body a few simple instructions. Slow down, keep your feet grounded, let your shoulders settle, breathe normally instead of forcing enormous breaths. Look at the person you are speaking to. Move your hands when they naturally belong there, rather than constantly adjusting them because you are nervous. None of these behaviors make you confident by themselves. They prevent fear from choosing your posture for you. Your behavior can become evidence for your own mind. When you repeatedly discover that you can remain steady while uncomfortable, the experience begins changing your expectations. You are teaching yourself that nervousness does not automatically lead to embarrassment, retreat, or failure. This is also why deliberately changing your physical presence can feel strange in the beginning. If you have spent years shrinking when you feel uncertain, standing openly can feel excessive. If you normally rush through your sentences, speaking slowly can feel unnatural. If you avoid eye contact whenever you become anxious, holding it for another second can feel almost confrontational. But there is an important difference between pretending to possess qualities you do not value and practicing behaviors that express qualities you are trying to develop. A person learning patience may deliberately pause before reacting. That pause is not dishonest, it is training. In the same way, choosing composure while you feel nervous can be a form of practice rather than deception. You can see this in ordinary situations that have nothing to do with public speaking. Someone asks you a question unexpectedly. Instead of immediately blurting out an answer, you take a second. Someone interrupts you. Instead of becoming visibly defensive, you finish your thought calmly. Someone disagrees with you. Instead of shrinking or becoming aggressive, you remain physically settled while you consider what they said. These tiny moments matter because confidence is rarely built during one dramatic performance. It is built through repeated encounters with manageable discomfort. Each time you experience tension without allowing it to dictate your behavior, you create another piece of evidence about who you are under pressure. The point is to create space between sensation and action. Fear can arrive. Let it arrive. Nervousness can make your heart beat harder. Let your heart beat. You do not need to fight every sensation, because fighting it can make you even more aware of it. Notice it, then return your attention to what you are actually doing. The person in front of you, the sentence you are speaking, the decision you need to make, the task that brought you there. This return is where psychological presence develops. Your mind stops circling around the question of how you are being perceived and reconnects with the situation itself. If this way of thinking has been useful to you, consider subscribing. This is not about collecting motivation or chasing another quick lesson. It is simply a way to continue exploring ideas that help you think more clearly, respond more deliberately, and build a steadier relationship with yourself. And something else begins to change when you practice this consistently. The deeper change is that you stop being surprised by your own nervousness. You know it can appear without taking over. That knowledge creates a quiet kind of certainty. You no longer need to tell yourself that you are fearless because you have experienced something more useful. You can function while afraid. That is a much stronger foundation than temporary excitement or positive self-talk, because it does not depend on feeling good. It depends on having evidence that your choices remain available even when your emotions become uncomfortable. Once you understand that, confidence becomes less about constructing an impressive exterior and more about becoming difficult for your own anxiety to control. Your posture becomes a decision. Your breathing becomes a way of returning to the present. Your pace becomes a reminder that urgency is not always real. You are practicing the ability to remain with yourself while the room does whatever it is going to do. That is why the body matters so much. It gives you a place to begin when the mind is noisy. You may not be able to command yourself to feel fearless, but you can take one slow breath, settle your shoulders, and choose the next action. With repetition, that choice stops feeling like a performance. It starts feeling like it. Sometimes the most confident thing you can do is nothing at all. A conversation reaches a quiet moment, and suddenly you feel responsible for repairing it. You add another sentence, then another. You explain what you meant even though nobody asked. You make a joke because the silence feels heavier than it should. That interpretation creates urgency, and urgency changes your behavior. You begin speaking for the sake of escaping your own discomfort rather than because there is something worth saying. Silence reveals something important about the relationship you have with other people's reactions. If you believe you must constantly keep a conversation moving, you are quietly assuming responsibility for another person's experience. That is an impossible responsibility because none of those things belong entirely to you. You can contribute to a conversation, but you cannot control the atmosphere inside another person's mind. Once you understand that distinction, silence stops feeling like an empty space that needs to be filled. It becomes part of the conversation itself. This is where the Stoic approach becomes practical. Self-command does not mean controlling every external detail. It means becoming more deliberate about what you do with the things you cannot control. A pause belongs to the other person as much as it belongs to you. They may need time to answer. They may disagree. They may not know what to say. They may simply be comfortable being quiet. None of these possibilities requires you to rush in and protect yourself from an imagined judgment. Your responsibility is smaller and more manageable. Listen, think, and speak when you have something meaningful to add. That sounds simple until you try it. You ask someone a question and they pause. Your instinct tells you to help them answer. You start guessing what they mean. You offer possible answers. You explain the question again. You may even answer it yourself before they have had the chance. Seneca observed that we often suffer more in anticipation than in reality, and the same pattern appears here. The discomfort of silence creates an urgency that may have nothing to do with what is actually happening. You are removing their opportunity to think aloud, choose their words, and reveal what they genuinely believe. When you allow the silence to remain, you give them room. You also give yourself room to listen instead of preparing your next sentence. The same principle becomes powerful in disagreement. Someone challenges your opinion, and there is a brief pause before you respond. That pause can feel dangerous when you are concerned about looking weak. You might immediately defend yourself, add more evidence, or become sharper than necessary because you want to regain control of the interaction. But confidence does not require an instant response. Sometimes the strongest response begins with taking a moment to decide whether a response is even necessary. You can disagree without turning disagreement into a threat to your identity. This is one reason silence can influence how other people experience you. When you are constantly filling every gap, your words begin competing with one another. Important points become buried beneath explanations, qualifications, and nervous commentary. When you become comfortable with pauses, your speech gains space around it. People have time to process what you said. You have time to notice their reaction without becoming consumed by it. You seem more deliberate because you are no longer trying to prove your value with every sentence. The irony is that you often become more noticeable by trying less desperately to be noticed. There is also a private transformation happening underneath the social one. Each time you allow silence without escaping it, you discover that discomfort can rise and fall without requiring action. That is a deeply useful lesson. Anxiety often creates the illusion that something must be done immediately. You must speak. You must explain. You must fix the impression. You must make them understand. But many situations do not require immediate intervention. Sometimes the emotion simply needs to be experienced without being obeyed. That experience becomes evidence. Over time, this changes the way you enter conversations. You are less focused on managing impressions and more interested in understanding what is actually happening. You listen for meaning rather than waiting for your turn. You become more patient with your own uncertainty. Even your questions improve because you are willing to hear the answer instead of using questions as a way to keep attention on yourself. There is a subtle kind of strength in that restraint. It tells the other person that you are not desperate to control the interaction, and it tells yourself that you do not need constant reassurance to remain steady. This does not mean silence should become a strategy for appearing mysterious or powerful. The moment you start using silence to manipulate people, you have returned to the same problem from another direction. You are still performing for an audience. Become comfortable enough with yourself that you no longer need to fill every uncomfortable space. Speak when speaking serves the moment. Pause when thinking requires it. Listen when another person needs room. Leave a silence alone when there is nothing that needs to be added. That is restraint, not performance. And once silence stops feeling like something you have to defeat, another kind of confidence becomes possible. You can simply remain calm when someone takes longer to answer. You can hear an opinion you dislike without immediately reacting. You can sit through a moment where you are not certain how you are being perceived and continue behaving according to your own standards. You are no longer trying to control the room. You are learning to govern yourself within it. And when that becomes natural, disagreement loses some of its power because discomfort does not require surrender. The real test of confidence is not what happens when everyone agrees with you. It is what happens when someone pushes back. The harder moment comes when someone questions an idea, criticizes a decision, speaks with more authority, or simply looks unconvinced. Suddenly, the confidence that felt solid begins depending on the other person's reaction. You start reviewing your words while they are still speaking. Sometimes you even abandon a position you had carefully considered because the other person delivered their disagreement with greater certainty. Human beings are sensitive to social pressure, especially when status is involved. Someone with more experience can make your judgment feel smaller. Someone who speaks confidently can make a weak argument sound stronger than it is. Confidence in another person is evidence of their certainty, not proof of their correctness. Once you understand that, disagreement becomes less personal. You can listen carefully without immediately surrendering your position because you are evaluating the argument instead of reacting to the person delivering it. This is where being open-minded needs a more precise meaning. It is not changing your mind whenever somebody disagrees. It is examining your position honestly and allowing good reasons to change it. If someone points out a flaw you missed, changing your view is not weakness. It is intellectual discipline. If someone offers nothing beyond pressure or criticism, there is no obligation to abandon your judgment. You can hear them and still decide that your original position remains stronger. I may be wrong, and I do not need to assume that I am wrong simply because you disagree. That distinction becomes especially important when your values are involved. How you treat people, what standards you live by, or what behavior you refuse to accept should not be rewritten every time someone disapproves. Stoic discipline begins by separating what deserves examination from what merely creates pressure. Your reasoning can be questioned, your principles can be examined. But discomfort alone is not a good reason to abandon either. If you decide to change, let it come from reflection rather than fear. Otherwise, you are reacting. Think about a simple conversation where you offer an idea and someone immediately responds with, "That will never work." The old reaction may be to explain yourself rapidly, defend every detail, or retreat with an embarrassed agreement. A steadier response can be much simpler. Listen. Ask what specifically they think will fail. Consider the answer. Aristotle described a well-trained mind as one capable of considering an idea without immediately accepting or rejecting it, and that is precisely the discipline required here. If they reveal something you missed, acknowledge it. If their concern does not hold up, explain why you still see the situation differently. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. You only need to remain connected to your judgment while allowing reality to correct you when necessary. That is where self-command becomes visible in ordinary conversation. Stubbornness is often mistaken for strength because both can look like resistance. But stubbornness refuses to move even when evidence changes. Confidence can move. It simply refuses to move without a reason. People eventually notice whether your position is guided by thought or ego. Someone who becomes defensive over every disagreement creates tension. Someone who collapses under every disagreement creates uncertainty. The person who can listen, think, and remain steady communicates something different. They show that their identity does not depend on winning. A psychological shift happens when you stop treating disagreement as a threat. You become less interested in controlling how quickly the other person accepts you. You can tolerate leaving the conversation with them unconvinced. You can even accept that someone might think less of you because you refuse to agree. Approval feels immediate, while self-respect is quieter. Approval gives quick safety. Self-respect asks whether you acted according to your judgment and values when safety was uncertain. The second standard takes longer to build, but it creates a much more stable foundation. This does not mean becoming emotionally detached or pretending criticism never affects you. A confident person can feel embarrassed, irritated, or uncertain after being challenged. The difference is what happens next. Instead of turning the emotion into a command, they give themselves enough space to examine it. Maybe the criticism touched an insecurity. Maybe it exposed a real weakness. Maybe it was unfair. Maybe it was completely accurate. The feeling alone cannot answer those questions. Reflection can. That is why the pause matters so much. It creates distance between the first emotional reaction and the final decision. With practice, that pause begins changing how other people experience you. They notice that disagreement does not immediately knock you off balance. They also notice that you can change your mind when the reasoning deserves it. That combination makes your confidence believable. You are neither desperate to prove yourself nor desperate to preserve an image of being right. You are simply willing to stand where your judgment currently places you, and that creates a deeper kind of presence. You do not need to dominate the room because you are no longer fighting for psychological permission to occupy it. Eventually, this way of responding becomes less about appearing confident and more about trusting the process by which you make decisions. You know you can listen without surrendering, reconsider without collapsing, and disagree without becoming hostile. That knowledge changes how you carry yourself. And that is where the next layer becomes important, because people begin forming an impression of you before they have heard your reasoning at all. The way you enter, begin, and establish yourself can quietly influence everything that follows. Before you have said anything meaningful, people have already begun collecting small pieces of information about you. They notice how quickly you enter a room, whether you look around nervously, how you greet someone, whether your voice begins strongly or fades at the end of the first sentence. None of these details tells the whole story, yet people naturally use limited information to form an early impression. You do the same thing. You meet someone and notice their posture, tone, pace, and expression before you know their history. The important point is not to become obsessed with controlling those impressions. That would create another form of anxiety. The point is to stop sending signals that contradict the person you are trying to become. If you respect your own judgment, let your behavior reflect that respect. Think about the first few seconds of a conversation. Someone asks what you do, and instead of answering simply, you immediately explain what you are still trying to figure out, why your situation is complicated, or why you are not as successful as you might sound. You may believe you are being modest. Perhaps you are trying to prevent the other person from thinking too highly of you, because being judged positively can feel just as uncomfortable as being judged negatively. So you lower expectations before anyone has the opportunity to create them. The problem is that the other person now has to interpret you through the frame you created. They may not see the uncertainty as temporary. They may simply conclude that you are uncertain. This is why the beginning of an interaction deserves attention. You do not need a rehearsed personality. You need a clear starting point. If someone asks a straightforward question, give a straightforward answer. If you need time to think, take it without apologizing for the pause. If you have made a mistake, acknowledge it without turning the mistake into a confession about your character. A mistake is an event. It does not have to become an identity. That distinction sounds small, but it changes the way you recover from uncomfortable moments. Someone who makes an error and calmly corrects it communicates much more stability than someone who spends 5 minutes explaining why the error proves they are incompetent. The same principle applies when you enter a room where you believe everyone else has more status than you. You may become smaller without realizing it. Your voice gets quieter. You speak faster. You laugh at comments you do not find funny because you want to signal acceptance. You agree before you have processed what was said. None of this necessarily comes from dishonesty. It can come from the simple desire to belong. Epictetus offered a demanding perspective on this kind of approval seeking. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. The point is not to become indifferent to other people. It is to stop allowing their opinions to dictate your conduct. Belonging becomes expensive when you have to trade away your natural presence to purchase it. You do not need to convince yourself that you are the most important person in the room. That would only replace insecurity with ego. A steadier approach is to remember that your role is to participate honestly and attentively, regardless of who happens to be sitting across from you. This is where the Stoic separation between character and reputation becomes useful. Reputation is partly outside your control. You can behave thoughtfully and still be misunderstood. You can speak clearly and still be disliked. You can make a good decision and still receive criticism. If your confidence depends on preventing those outcomes, you will constantly adjust yourself to other people's reactions. Your behavior becomes a negotiation with approval. You say what will be accepted instead of what you actually believe. You smile when you want to remain neutral. You apologize when no apology is needed. You soften a boundary because you are afraid of what enforcing it might make someone think. There is a healthier standard. Ask yourself whether the way you are presenting yourself is consistent with the person you want to be, rather than whether everyone is responding exactly as you hoped. That question returns your attention to something you can actually influence. You can choose to speak clearly. You can choose to listen carefully. You can choose to avoid unnecessary defensiveness. You can choose to admit uncertainty without insulting yourself. You can choose to remain respectful while disagreeing. These choices do not guarantee admiration, and that is precisely why they are valuable. They allow you to build confidence on conduct instead of applause. The first impression can still matter. It would be unrealistic to pretend otherwise. People form quick judgments, and those judgments can influence how they interpret what comes later. But knowing this does not mean you should become calculating. It means you should become intentional. There is a difference between managing your behavior and manipulating another person's perception. If you sit upright because you want to feel present, that is intentional. If you slow your speech because you want your thoughts to be understood, that is intentional. If you stop apologizing for every opinion because you are learning to respect your own judgment, that is intentional. None of these actions require you to become someone else. The deeper change happens when you stop using an interaction as a test of worth. Someone responds, and you appreciate it without needing it to prove anything. Someone seems unimpressed, and you notice it without trying to win them over. Someone misunderstands you, and you clarify without becoming desperate. Someone rejects an idea, and you consider their reasoning without assuming rejection defines you. Feelings may move, but they do not dictate what you do next. There is one final mistake that can quietly undo everything you have practiced, turning confidence into another performance. You learn to speak clearly, control your posture, tolerate silence, and stand behind your opinions, and then you start monitoring yourself again. Am I standing correctly? Did I sound confident? Was that pause long enough? Did they respect what I said? The same insecurity has simply changed clothes. You are still looking outside yourself for evidence that you are doing enough. Confidence becomes another image to protect, and protecting an image is exhausting because the moment someone questions it, you feel the need to prove yourself again. That is why confidence should never require you to become the loudest person in the room. You do not need to interrupt people, dominate discussions, refuse to admit mistakes, or act as though nothing can affect you. Those behaviors can look powerful, but they often reveal how much energy is being spent on appearing powerful. A person who constantly needs to demonstrate strength is still being controlled by perception. Quiet confidence has less to prove. It can listen without disappearing, disagree without attacking, apologize without collapsing, and admit a mistake without feeling that the entire identity has been damaged. There is strength in remaining human without treating weakness as a threat. This is where Stoic discipline becomes more useful than confidence as an image. The goal is not to manufacture a permanent emotional state. The goal is to become more deliberate about what you do when emotions appear. Fear can remain. Embarrassment can remain. Doubt can remain. You are simply learning that none of them automatically gets the final decision. That changes the standard completely. Instead of asking whether you felt confident today, you can ask whether you acted according to your judgment when discomfort appeared. Did you speak when you had something worth saying? Did you remain present when you wanted to escape? Did you allow another person's reaction to determine your behavior? Those questions give you something real to work with. Trying to change everything at once creates another form of pressure. You hear all of this and decide that from tomorrow onward, you will speak perfectly, hold perfect eye contact, never over-explain yourself. Pause at exactly the right moments and respond calmly to every challenge. That sounds disciplined, but it is unrealistic. Epictetus understood that meaningful change is built gradually, comparing it to the way a grape or a fig develops rather than appearing all at once. When you expect immediate transformation, every imperfect interaction becomes evidence that you have failed. Then frustration replaces practice. A better approach is smaller. Find the behavior that exposes your insecurity most clearly and work on that one first. Maybe you always apologize before giving an opinion. Maybe you rush whenever someone looks serious. Maybe you fill every silence. Maybe you abandon your position as soon as someone sounds more certain. Take that one behavior into a situation where the consequences are small. Do not wait for the biggest presentation of your life. Practice during an ordinary conversation. If you tend to hedge, give one clear opinion without unnecessary disclaimers. If you rush your speech, deliberately slow down during a routine interaction. If silence makes you uncomfortable, allow a few seconds before answering. If disagreement makes you retreat, stay with your position long enough to explain your reasoning calmly. These moments may feel insignificant, but they are exactly where confidence becomes practical. You are giving your mind new evidence through experience rather than trying to persuade it with positive statements. Pay attention to what happens afterward. Maybe the other person responds normally. Maybe they listen more carefully. Maybe nothing noticeable happens. That is fine. The most important feedback may come from you. You might realize that the pause felt uncomfortable, but did not cause the conversation to collapse. You might notice that you expressed an opinion without apologizing and survived disagreement. You might discover that someone challenged you, and you remained calm enough to think before responding. These small experiences weaken the old belief that discomfort must be escaped. You begin collecting evidence that you can remain steady while uncertainty is present. That evidence changes your relationship with fear. Before, nervousness might have meant, "I should stop." Now it can simply mean, "I am nervous." The feeling remains, but its meaning changes. A fast heartbeat does not mean you are incapable. A quiet moment does not mean you are being judged. A disagreement does not mean you have lost status. An awkward sentence does not mean you have ruined everything. The mind often adds a story to discomfort, and confidence grows when you learn to question that story before obeying it. Keeping track of your practice can help. At the end of the day, remember one moment when you behaved differently. Maybe you spoke without apologizing. Maybe you paused instead of filling the silence. Maybe you listened before defending yourself. These small records become evidence that you can behave with composure under pressure. Your mind trusts experience more deeply than declarations because experience shows what you can actually do when the situation is real. That may be the most useful definition of confidence, not certainty that everything will go well, but trust that you can remain yourself when things do not. You cannot control every impression, outcome, disagreement, or emotion. You can control whether you abandon your judgment to escape discomfort. Each time you refuse to do that, you strengthen something deeper than an appearance. You strengthen self-command. You do not need to enter every room fearless. You need to know that fear does not decide how you walk in, speak, or leave again. Confidence was never about becoming someone who has nothing to fear. It is about becoming someone who no longer lets fear decide how they speak, move, or carry themselves. The more you practice that kind of self-command, the less you need to prove anything to anyone. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. If you want to continue exploring this way of thinking, watch one of the suggested videos on the screen and keep building the kind of confidence that does not depend on being seen as powerful, because it comes from knowing you can remain steady when the world gives you every reason not to.